What do we know today about October 7th?
None of them have what you might call a perfect record on the Israel-Palestine conflict.
What do you make of the eyewitness testimonies?
This is the same eyewitness testimony that will tell you that Israel is the most moral army in the world. Israel is a very inbred society.
What was the thinking for Hamas in the planning in the days and weeks and months and years before October 7th?
Gaza was basically an inferno under the Israeli occupation. The final nail in the coffin of Gaza was going to be when Saudi Arabia joined the Abraham Accords. Gaza was over.
It's a pleasure to speak to you. I've been reading your work for long enough to start feeling a lot of the pain that you feel, seeing how everything is evolving. So I'm pretty excited for the conversation. I appreciate your time. So what I wanted to start with, Professor, is on October 7th. I've heard you speak about it a lot over the last 2 years. And one thing I've seen happen since the beginning is at the beginning, everyone was worried to question anything and to even investigate the various claims. Everyone had to condemn it, which obviously I do, and accept that there's been significant atrocities and that Israel has the right to defend itself. But as we've seen throughout history, over time, as things begin to settle, more and more people begin to question it. And you get less ostracized as you do. So I want to start there. It's been a while now since that event. And I think now more and more people are starting to go through all the various claims, like the beheaded babies that were debunked a long time ago. So I want to start by asking you, Professor, is what do we know today about October 7th? What are the atrocities that have been confirmed, that have been verified? And what are the claims or the misconceptions that have been debunked since then?
Well, I think that's a good question. It's a good place to begin. I think the global picture is, as far as we know, is accurate. Roughly 1,200 people were killed on October 7th. Of those 1,200, about 400 were combatants, about 800 were civilians. And as far as we know, and when I say we know, I can only base myself on what I usually base myself, which is the authoritative human rights reports, be it the UN Human Rights Council Commission of Inquiry, or Amnesty International, or Human Rights Watch. They don't have, incidentally, none of them have what you might call a perfect record on the Israel-Palestine conflict. In fact, if you look at my book, Gaza, An Inquest into Its Martyrdom, probably half of the book is devoted to exposing the inaccuracies in Amnesty reports, Human Rights Watch reports, UN Commission of Inquiry reports. So I am not pretending as if they are the last word on the subject. On the other hand, I've not seen compelling evidence that contradicts the claim that overwhelmingly the deaths that occurred on October 7th are attributable to Hamas and other armed groups in Gaza. I haven't seen evidence, at any rate, evidence that convinces me that the deaths that may have occurred in the course of Israel's reaction to October 7th, here I'm talking about within Israel, that those deaths were a significant portion of the total numbers, the entirety. On the less on the local level, I would say the main claim which does not hold up against the evidence, basically because there is no evidence, it's the claim of Hamas having weaponized rape on October 7th. Now, there are two separate aspects to it. One is, did it happen? And the second is, why did Israel choose, excuse me, why did Israel choose to die on that hill? Horrendous things happened on October 7th. You didn't need to die on the hill of mass rape. They chose that hill to die on, and frankly, not that I would want to defend anything Israel does, but it was such a stupid thing to do because you're in effect um, placing all your credibility about October 7th on the mass rapes, which clearly never occurred. There's no evidence that even one rape occurred on October 7th.
Do you mind if I
So
ask
I,
you on the, sorry, Professor, just on the rape one? I've gone through the
mm,
various organizations or bodies that claim that rape has happened. So BBC reviewed evidence. You probably know obviously more about it than I do. BBC reviewed
Inbred.
evidence of rape and mutilation. New York Times interviewed 150 plus witnesses, confirming about 10 direct cases. You've got confessions, Hamas fighters, a video admitting to rape. One interrogated militant described gang rape as well. There's two more example. There's obviously the UN mission findings, which I'll let you cover
Well,
as
the
well.
UN, allow me,
Please, please.
of course, you should continue. Just a point of clarification. The UN mission makes a distinction between rape as a subcategory of what they call sexual violence on October 7th. The UN Commission of Inquiry states that it has no digital or photographic evidence of rape. The only evidence that they, as well as Pramila Patten, the UN Secretary General's special envoy for conflict related sexual violence, as well as she, and as well as others, none of them have claimed that they have seen any material or physical evidence of rape. That would be forensic evidence, medical evidence, digital evidence, photographic evidence. They've not seen it. In fact, even though Pramila Patten's report was, in my opinion, utterly laughable, in fact, she doesn't even claim that she carried on an investigative mission. She doesn't even claim that they were competent to make investigative findings. Nonetheless, she reaches investigative conclusions. Leaving that aside for the moment, to me, the most conclusive aspect of this claim of rape is the following. Pramila Patten states in her report that she looked at 5,000 photographs. It's not a small number.
Hmm.
I don't even know. I couldn't even imagine looking at 5,000 photographs. It would take me probably till the end of time. And then she says she looked at 50 hours of digital evidence. She says that the digital evidence came from CCTV, what is it? Dash cams, body cams, traffic light cameras, iPhones, 50 hours of that digital evidence. Now, the whole of October 7th probably lasted roughly about 40 hours. So that means an hour of digital evidence plus for every hour of October 7th. And she finds, and now I'm quoting her, there was no direct digital or photographic evidence of sexual violence on October 7th. Now, bear in mind, Pramila Patten used the bigger category. She didn't say no direct evidence of rape, direct physical evidence, digital, photographic. She didn't say of rape. She said of sexual violence. There's none. Now, to me, that's a very strange finding because you are of a generation, I'm speaking to you personally, you are of a generation that photographs everything. Everything from your morning breakfast to every police or state security atrocity. When police brutality occurs in my country, everyone gets their iPhone out immediately. Now, according to the Israelis, here I'm not referring to Pramila Patten, they said all the rapes occurred in in open space. And they said it was purposeful. They said that the Hamas terrorists did it in open space because they wanted to terrorize Israeli society. And they also say that these alleged eyewitnesses, they were in hiding while observing these multiple gang rapes. They were in hiding. So I found it personally very perplexing that if because most of the people, remember, your generation, they were attending the music
Nova
festival.
Festival. Mm.
Yeah. I found it very perplexing that they didn't take one picture. Now, you might say, well, they were terrorized, battlefield conditions. Well, Israelis are in Gaza all the time. That age cohort, they serve in Gaza. And they're photographing the atrocities they're committing all the time. And they're posting it on their social media. So the claim that maybe they were paralyzed or shocked, well, that's not Israelis.
There's
So, mhm.
What do you make of the eyewitness testimonies? Many of those that the New York Times, the BBC has referenced, the UN mission has also referenced.
I know. This is the same eyewitness testimony that will tell you that Israel is the most moral army in the world. They will tell you that Israel is these are the same people who will tell you Israel is not committing any atrocities in Gaza. Israel is a very inbred society. There's the fact of being citizens of a state which pretends that it's always under siege, that always already breeds what's called a siege mentality. Number two, it calls itself a Jewish state. So for every Israeli Jew, it's family. That's also a deterrent to being, let's call it, honest. And then third, the most important deterrent is they all serve in the army. Israel's a citizen army. There's a deep sense, and I've noticed it myself over my adult life, when you talk to Israelis, even those who are critics of Israel, they are deeply proud of having served in the army. That's where, in our country, in many countries, you develop your core relationships in college. No, they developed their core relationships in the army. They are very proud of the particular division they served in, and there's a deep sense of camaraderie with their fellow soldiers in that particular or fellow unit members. When you add all that up, there's a, let's call it, a very large incentive to conjure stories that never happened. And I'm not going to dismiss that possibility. When I look at polls that were taken recently, after the Gaza genocide was uh, in time, who are still saying Israel is the most moral army in the world. They believe it.
Um, One last question there on the rape allegations. You do have Hamas members that were interrogated. I think there's about two of them. Yeah, two of them that
Hey,
confessed.
if I were interrogated by an Israeli, I would probably admit to having committed rape. The torture is pretty brutal. In fact, it's so brutal that they photograph it. They photograph committing rapes of uh, detainees. It's a very depraved society, unfortunately. I don't say that with glee, I say it factually. It's a very depraved society, and the record on torture goes back quite a ways. In fact, if you look at the serious Israeli historians, they freely admit that Israel was torturing Palestinian detainees from right after 1967. By the first Intifada, the torture of Palestinians had reached epidemic proportions, according to places like Human Rights Watch and the Israeli Information Center for Human Rights in the Occupied Territories. In fact, Israel was the only country in the world, the only one, that legalized torture. So when you tell me an Israeli detainee, excuse me, a detainee under the custody of Israel admitted X, Y, or Z, I'm sure they did, and I suppose I would also if needles were being sent up my fingernail.
I've interviewed former CIA officer John Kiriakou, who's obviously been a whistleblower on U.S. torture, and he's spoken about how torture is not an effective method to get the truth. And he was talking about how the FBI and the CIA clashed on torture as a method for
They're, they're
detainees.
not they're not interested in getting the truth. The torture is a deterrent. You don't forget the torture after you've been tortured. So it's being used not to obtain information. It's being used to terrorize people into submission.
I want to go back to so another thing that people have stopped speaking about after October 7th is what you'd call maybe the root causes of what led to this horrific event. And in one of the interviews, you said something that caught my attention. It was a while ago. I wrote it down. You said, I was like Sinwar, really. I was the same narrowness and tunnel vision because you were so deep in studying Palestinian history.
Uh-huh.
Can you elaborate by what you mean by the statement and explain what that tunnel vision is? And the reason I ask is what I what I always like to do is to try to put myself in other people's shoes, no matter who they are and how horrendous their actions were, whether it's Hamas, whether it's the Houthis, whether it's the Russians, the Ukrainians, the Americans in Iraq, the Iraqis, the ISIS, etc., to try to understand what's happening in their mind. So can you walk me through what was the thinking for Hamas in the planning in the days and weeks and months and years before October 7th, what their intentions were and what really drove them to commit that act?
Um, First of all, you understand that that question uh, enters speculative terrain. I can't tell you a single thing about what was definitely running through the head of uh, Mr. Sinwar. I believe I only met one Hamas leader a long time ago, Dr. Rantisi. I met him during the second Intifada. Other than Dr. MTC, I don't know if I've ever spoken to a Hamas member, except over YouTube. I've had conversations with uh, Naim Bas. Is it Bassem Naim? Bassem Naim, the international affairs representative of Hamas, who's an extremely decent guy. Has two PhDs from Germany, so he's a smart guy. Um, in any event, what I think happened, I don't think it requires great powers of imagination. Uh, Without going through the details, which I suspect many of you listeners know, Gaza was basically an inferno under the Israeli occupation. It was already being described by Israel's head of its National Security Council, Giora Eiland. He was already describing Gaza as a, quote, huge concentration camp, unquote, his words, in 2004. That was before Gaza came under the medieval criminal Israeli blockade in January 2006. And by, by October 2023, Gaza was being described by The Economist as a rubbish heap. Others described it as a human rubbish heap. Others described it as a toxic dump. Already in 2008, the UN Human Rights Chief, Mary Robinson, was describing, she said, I'll just get off my bookshelf 1 second. Mary Robinson, she said, Gaza's, quote, whole civilization has been destroyed. I'm not exaggerating. This is before 2008. By late 2008, Harvard's leading expert on Gaza's economy, a very decent person, Sarah Roy, she said, food, medicine, fuel, parts for water and sanitation systems, fertilizer, plastic sheeting, phones, paper, glue, shoes, even teacups are no longer getting through. The breakdown of an entire society is happening in front of us, but there is little international response beyond UN warnings, which are ignored. That was Gaza. That wasn't Gaza for a week. It wasn't Gaza for a month. It was Gaza, really. And here, I'm going back far. Gaza was already being described as a concentration camp by UN officials in 1950, when it was still under Egyptian control. Conditions continued to worsen, but it was a horror story from the get-go after the 1948 war. By 2023, 60% of Gazan young people your age, 60% were unemployed. It was the highest unemployment of any place in the world among that age cohort, 60%. They had been born into, the young men your age, the age cohort that burst the gates of Gaza on October 7th. They had been born into a concentration camp. They languished in a concentration camp, and it was almost certain they were going to die in that concentration camp. All they had to do each day is get up in the morning and pace the perimeter of this tiny parcel of land, 26 miles long, the length of a marathon, and 5 miles wide. Come October, Gaza had disappeared from the headlines. Nobody was talking about Gaza anymore. I know from my book sales, Gaza was dead in the water. And it looked like the final nail in the coffin of Gaza was going to be hammered in when Saudi Arabia joined the Abraham Accords. That was the expectation at that moment in 2023, that their fate was sealed. Gaza was over. So that, I think, is the crucial context for trying to understand the decision. Now, why they did it, that's when I talked about, in that context of why they did it.
Mate,
I talked about,
before that, just on the comment on and Saudi joining the Abraham Accords would have sealed the fate of Gaza. Can you elaborate on
yeah,
that?
yes, because there would no longer be any incentive anywhere in the Arab world to do anything for Gaza. Just like now, the moment there was the so-called ceasefire, what's the first thing that happened? First thing that happened is they signed a resolution, which is the end of Gaza. The UN and virtually every Arab Muslim state signed on. And what was the next thing that happened? That resolution was the end of Gaza. I'm not sure if you've read the resolution. That last resolution on 17 October 2025, resolution, UN Security Council Resolution 2803, that resolution literally, it gave the deed of Gaza to Donald Trump. It gave him the deed to Gaza. It's over. And they were expecting that to happen in 2023. And then what's the first thing that happened after the deal was sealed with the support of Algeria, Jordan, Egypt, Qatar, Indonesia, Pakistan? I don't think I have the full list yet. What's the first thing that happened? The Saudi prince went to the White House. That was the whole purpose of the resolution. So as to give the Saudis a fig leaf to go to Washington and sign on to the broader Abraham Accord.
But
so they knew that was coming.
why
They
the,
knew.
my question though is why the solution is violence? So they requested Hezbollah
I find this question a little bit perplexing. If you know the actual record, if you know the historical record, Hamas tried diplomacy. There are many reports coming out of even U.S. government departments, like the U.S. Institute for Peace. They said Hamas was trying to reach a diplomatic solution. You probably even remember when there was talk about Hamas either agreeing to a two-state solution or a 20 or 40-year hudna. Excuse me. You probably remember the talk about the hudna. They tried, and they were ignored. They tried international law. Unlike Israel, they cooperated with all the human rights organizations that sent over missions to investigate crimes committed after Operation Cast Lead and Operation Protective Edge. There were human rights commissions. There were UN commissions of inquiry. You must remember, I don't know how old you are, but if you're not too young, you will have to have remembered the Goldstone report after Operation Cast Lead. Goldstone was, by his own description, not me, he called himself a Zionist. He was Jewish. He was on the board of deputies of the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. They cooperated with him. Israel refused. They tried. What happened? Goldstone wrote a devastating report, and then the pressure was exerted on Goldstone by his people. He retracted the report on April 1st, 2010. They tried. And then you ask, why violence? Are you not so young as to have forgotten that on March 30th, 2018, they attempted the Great March of Return, a nonviolent civil disobedience? Hamas endorsed it. The idea didn't originate with them, but they went along with it. They cooperated with it. What happened? We know exactly what happened. We have the UN report, 250 pages, single spaced, very detailed report. You know what the report found? It found that the demonstrators were overwhelmingly nonviolent. And what did Israel do? The report said it targeted children. It targeted medics. It targeted journalists. It targeted double amputees. Hamas tried everything. I'm not saying they're saints, but they were in a desperate situation, so of course they're going to try everything. They tried diplomacy, they tried international law, they tried nonviolent civil resistance. What did they get for it? They got a permanent hellhole.
So if you, so we agree on a lot because I'm very critical of Israeli actions in Gaza, less so when it comes to Lebanon, Iran. I think I'm more balanced there, somewhere in the middle. But I've always made the argument that if you look at what the path that Yemen has taken, the path that Lebanon has taken under Hezbollah and Iran, compare that to the path that Egypt has taken, that Jordan has taken. And, you know, obviously Egypt and Jordan, big recipients of US aid. The countries are doing significantly better than Yemen, Lebanon. And then if you compare the path that Hamas has taken, I understand the attempts to peace, the recognition of a two-state solution, or the Hudna, the temporary peace, the 40-year peace or truce. But it's still a very different path to the West Bank. Now, obviously, West Bank...
Because the goal is totally different. The goal is totally different. The goal in places like Egypt is to neutralize them. In the case of the West Bank and Gaza, the goal is to subordinate them in the long-term expectation of cleansing them. It's a totally different goal. Israel doesn't want to take over Egypt. It wants to subordinate it for sure, but it doesn't want to take over them. It's a different policy. It's like comparing the U.S. policy with, let's say, U.S. policy with Egypt with the U.S. policy towards the Native Americans. You'd say that's a ridiculous comparison. The U.S. wanted the whole of North America.
I'm making the comparison of Hamas. So the comparison of Egypt and Jordan is that with Lebanon, Iran, and Yemen. But the comparison of Hamas is that of the West Bank. So the West Bank is taking a very different path. Even after October 7th, the violence there was very limited. Now, obviously, the West Bank is not doing too well either with the settlements, which I'm also very critical of. But it's in a very different state to that of Gaza.
Yeah, there was an option. I suppose there was an option allowing the Palestinian Authority to rule in Gaza and for Gaza to be like the West Bank. There's, I'm not going to deny that. People have a right to their independence. People have the right to their territorial sovereignty. And if they want to fight for it, I'm not going to deny them that right. If they want to live like slaves, like the people in the West Bank, I'm not going to deny them that right either. You have the right to choose to be a slave. And if you choose to fight, I'm going to support you if you want to fight. Am I going to support the atrocities committed on October 7th? I've said over and over again, atrocities were committed and they can't be excused. They can't be denied. Atrocities were committed. Am I going to condemn the people of Gaza for what they did? Nope. There, but for the grace of God, go I. If I were born into a concentration camp, if I were left to languish in a concentration camp, If I were destined to die in a concentration camp, I'm not sure what I would do. It's the same thing in our country, meaning the United States, when it comes to the slave revolts. Horrible things happened during our slave revolts. If you take the biggest slave revolt, was led by a fellow named Nat Turner in 1831.
Mm.
You know what his order was? His order was,
Kill
nobody
everyone.
disputes it, yes, and I kill all white people. That's pretty horrible. You'll have to agree. And then they did. They proceeded to go on a
And
rampage.
children, women, yeah, it was horrendous.
They smashed the skulls of children and women. Yet, I'll tell you something. There may be some debate in our country on whether to celebrate, Nat Turner. There is debate on that. But you know what? There's no debate about whether to condemn him. There isn't. There have been debates. Let's say they wanted to set up a memorial for Nat Turner in Virginia, where he launched the rebellion. And there was debate. It finally prevailed. They set up the memorial, but there was debate. But I've never heard anyone condemn Nat Turner. Not that his actions were indefensible, they were indefensible, but in the context, people felt the same sort of, let's call it, moral humility that I feel. Can I condemn a slave for doing anything? Can I condemn a slave for doing anything? No, I really can't. I can't condemn a slave. I will condemn the action. I will say, yes, that was an atrocity. That was a
October 7th
a
is
crime.
October 7th is an action. Can't you condemn October 7th the same way we condemn Israeli actions
I'm
on?
sure I condemn any atrocities, any crimes. The crime cannot be extenuated in the sense of it's a crime under international law and under moral law. It's a crime, but I won't condemn the perpetrators. Just as, let's say, Nat Turner is in a court of law, which he was, by the way. He was caught belatedly after there was a rampage of white people after the rampage of Turner. He was in the court of law. And let's say I'm the prosecuting attorney in the case of Nat Turner. Could I, in good conscience, say, Nat Turner, don't you condemn? Aren't you remorseful about the horrible acts you committed during your rebellion? I couldn't say. He's thinking, this guy wants me to condemn my horrible acts? I was born into slavery, and you want me to condemn myself? Do you know how ridiculous that is? Do you have any concept of how preposterous it is to be lecturing from on high a slave about his horrible acts? When you have imprisoned from people from the day of their birth till their death in what the head of Israel's National Security Council called a huge concentration camp, where the UN human rights chief, Mary Robinson, saying a whole civilization is being destroyed. I'm not exaggerating. When the very conservative Economist magazine describes it as a human rubbish heap in which these people have been confined from the day of their birth till their death. And me, as a prosecuting attorney, now telling Mr. Turner about how immoral his acts were, me casting a moral judgment on him, that is just so, it's not conceivable. It's so ridiculous. You want to say what happened was terrible? Fine, I have no problem with saying that. But to condemn those people? No way on God's earth. Those words will come out of my mouth. That's not going to happen on my watch.
What do you say to people that try to make a similar argument? Jews have been condemned, ostracized, gone through a horrendous genocide in World War II. They don't have their own state. No country wanted to welcome them after World War II. And after going through what they've gone through for so long, beyond decades, hundreds of years, for them to finally have their own state, be surrounded by many Arab countries that attacked him on multiple occasions.
No, they didn't. I don't know of any Arab countries that attacked them on any occasion, with the possible exception of 1948. I don't know of any. I think that's just fantasy. There's no evidence of that. Did the Arab states attack Israel in 1956, or was it Israel that colluded with the UK and France to attack the Sinai? In 1967, who launched the first strike?
Preemptively, as there was a build-up, a military build-up.
Preemptively. We knew the United States and Israel agreed on two facts on the eve of the Israeli strike. Two facts. Number one, Nasser wasn't going to attack. Number two, if he attacked, and even in concert with the neighboring Arab states, Lyndon Johnson, who was the president, he says, all of our intelligence shows us that you will, quote, whip the hell out of them. That's all. What you say is just propaganda. That's not what happened. In 1973, did Egypt attack Israel? No. Egypt attacked Israeli occupied Sinai. It didn't attack Israel. You want to go through every other war? In 1982, did Israel attack Lebanon, or did Lebanon attack Israel? 15 to 20,000 Lebanese and Palestinians, overwhelmingly civilians, were killed. Who attacked who in 1982?
Because of the Palestinian Resistance Force Liberation Army being present in Lebanon, using Lebanon as their base after being kicked out of Palestinian territory.
There was a ceasefire signed in July 1981 between the Palestinian forces in Lebanon, the PLO, and Israel. All the records show Israel honored the ceasefire. You know who kept breaking the ceasefire? It was Israel. You know why Israel kept breaking the ceasefire? Because the PLO wanted a two-state solution, and Israel was coming under huge international pressure to finally settle the conflict. So it decided to destroy the PLO, because you know what they called it? Israel's senior political scientist at the time, Avner Yaniv, you know what he called it? Israel attacked because of, quote, the PLO's peace offensive. The PLO was being too moderate. That's why Israel attacked. Because of, as Yaniv calls it, the PLO's peace offensive.
So going to the question though, the core point of Jews having gone through a lot, deserving their own state. I'm not saying
they got their
state, and you're saying that a two-state solution should be the next step. Is that your answer? Because there's the argument about Gaza historically not even being quote unquote Palestinian, being there was never a sovereign Palestinian state.
Listen, I'm sure that I'm from Brooklyn, New York. I'm sure there are arguments that Brooklyn is not really part of the United States. I'm sure some lunatic can come up with the argument that Brooklyn's not part of the United States. Those sorts of arguments to me are, they're on the side. They're in the lunatic zone of humanity. I have no interest in them. Gaza's not part of the West Bank, and Jerusalem is not part of the West Bank, and Hebron is historically Israeli, and Jericho belongs. What are you doing? What are you doing? No, really, it's an enigma to me. What are you trying to prove? Okay, say the Palestinians never existed, the whole thing was made up. There was a conspiracy, some Palestinians leaders gathered in the graveyard, and they said, let's all pretend we're Palestinian, and then that's how Palestinians came about. It's all a fiction. Everything is a fiction. The only thing that exists, there's only one fact that exists, the Jewish people. They've been there for 3,000 years. what do they call it? The Jewish people will live. Everything else is a fiction. I'm not sure in the Jewish mindset whether any non-Jews exist. I'm sure Netanyahu, outside Jews, everybody else is somewhere in the great chain of being, somewhere beneath them in the great chain of being. That's their mentality. Nobody exists. And then you sit here and you tell me, there's an argument that Gaza is now part of the West. What is it part of? Can you tell me? Is it part of, I don't know, is it part of Alaska? What is it part of?
Yeah, I don't.
Where do you come up with? I don't know. Where are you from? Where we broadcast?
No, so this is not my position. Just to be clear, I'm in Dubai right now. This is not my position. To be clear, I think the historical argument just doesn't make sense. You can make that argument on multiple territories around the world. You have to redraw the maps around the world. So I'm not saying I agree with the historical argument. Just want to get your take on it.
There's no take. It's like, Professor Finkelstein, what's your take on the world being flat? Do you have a take on that?
Well, I think the world is. I think it's not a good comparison. The world was never flat. I think the historical argument, while it is a fact, you could say historically Gaza was not part of a Palestinian sovereign state. But I'm saying it does not justify Gaza not being Palestinian because there was no Palestinian state. I think that's a pretty weak argument relative to other arguments that could be made. But look, moving to where we are now, there's another statement that you made about essentially Gaza being handed over to Trump, the deed of Gaza being handed over to Trump. Can you elaborate on this? And what does that mean for Gaza moving forward? What do you see happen next in Gaza?
Not moving forward. What does it mean? The UN Security Council approved a resolution which create what they call a board of peace. The board of peace has effectively sovereign powers in Gaza. It is not accountable, according to the resolution. The board of peace presides in Gaza. It is not accountable to anybody. There is no UN supervision. There is no Security Council supervision. There is no external entity, according to the UN resolution, to which the quote unquote Board of Peace is responsible. The only thing the resolution says in the next to the last sentence was, quote, it requests that the Board of Peace submit a report every 6 months to the Security Council. That's it. Now, according to the resolution explicitly says it endorses the Trump peace plan, which is attached to the resolution as an annex. It says that the Trump peace plan has to be implemented in its entirety. The Trump peace plan names Trump the head of the Board of Peace. And then, if there were any lingering doubt, the U.S. representative, after the resolution was passed 13-0, with the 2 abstentions by the UK, 2 abstentions by Russia and China, the U.S. representative stated that the Board of Peace will be headed by Donald Trump. And after that came the statements of the other 12, well, actually 14, because the Chinese and Russians also made statements. Not one of them dissented from that. Not one. Now, I ask you, if that's named the presiding body and Trump is named the head of state of the presiding body, and it's not held in any shape or form accountable to anybody, any external entity, is it not correct to say that Donald Trump now holds the deed to Gaza courtesy of the Security Council? Is that not correct?
It is also temporary. It is a temporary transitional administration.
Yeah, you know why? Because in 2 years, there won't be anybody left in Gaza. It's transitional till December 2027. Who's going to be left there then? You think it's going to be reconstructed? You think Israel is going to allow that? You think Israel is going to allow in humanitarian aid? Israel just spent the last 2 years and 2 months systematically and methodically reducing Gaza to rubble in order to make it uninhabitable. That was their goal. They said it over and over again. We're going to make Gaza unlivable. Do you really believe now they're going to suddenly do an about face and chant, give peace a chance, intone Om, and they're going to allow for Gaza's reconstruction after spending 2 years and 2 months pulverizing it, leaving behind 60 million tons of rubble? You want me to indulge these fantasies because your country voted for the resolution or endorsed the resolution? Those depraved Arab slaves and stooges who signed Gaza's death warrant by giving it to Trump, who gave it to Israel.
What do you think is Trump's intention in signing this? What's his plan?
Oh, there's no question. He doesn't care about Gaza. What do you think he cares about Gaza?
He cares about being a peace president.
You know he doesn't. He cares about the Saudi deal. He's talked about it for years, the deal of the century. And he knew the Saudis needed a fig leaf. They couldn't sign off on the deal in the midst of a genocide. They needed it off the headlines, which they succeeded. It's gone. Nobody talks about Gaza anymore. It's over. There's no interest at all anymore in Gaza. It's dead. That's all they needed. He doesn't care about Gaza. He's a real estate mogul. He wanted Saudi. He wants that money, the Gulf money.
And what do you
and his family.
What do you think the UAE, Saudi, what do you think these countries want in Gaza? Because the population there obviously overwhelmingly support Palestinians and a Palestinian state, more than the US, more than Europe, more than the rest of the world.
Well, I don't think that's true, actually. I think there was more support in the Western countries than the Arab world for the people in Gaza. I don't think that what you're saying is true at all. I think they want to join the West. They have as much contempt for the Arab world as most of the people in the West do. They want to be westernized. They want to be like Israel. They want to be like the United States. They think the Gazans, are from the Middle Ages. They want to join the Western camp. The most brain dead people, by the way, in the Arab world are definitely the Emiratis. Completely brain dead.
Wow! You hold on. By the way, yes, sir.
At Harvard University, the biggest defenders of the Jews who were opposed to the encampments, the biggest offenders were the Emiratis. You ever listen to them talk? I mean, they sound, I don't know, retarded. What can I tell you?
I'm just trying to look at now the countries that support a two-state solution the most. Probably would need more time to look at it. But I'd be very shocked if Arab nations don't score top on the list.
I don't think they. I don't think they care. I mean, in part I get it. In part I get it that given the horrors that occurred in Iraq, that occurred in Syria, that occurred in
Plus,
Libya.
it's fellow Muslims, Professor.
Excuse me.
It's a fellow religion. You have fellow Muslims supporting their Muslim brothers in Palestine. At least that's how they see it. So that's why I'd expect. And obviously, the story.
I saw the Yemenis. I saw the Houthis. I have deep respect for the Houthis. Very deep respect for the Houthis. By the way, you can laugh about it. The Houthis are ruthless. Obviously, I know that. I'm fully aware of it. But I happen to live in kind of in a city, New York City. The Yemenis, they own all the grocery stores. That's not unusual in New York. Different jobs are controlled by different ethnic groups. Like superintendents of buildings are all Albanian, and it happens that the grocery stores are all Yemeni, all Yemeni. And I talk to them a lot. I'm friends with them. They know me, from the social media. And they don't like the Houthis. They don't like the Houthis, except one thing. If you say what they did for Palestine, they're very proud. They're very proud. The Houthis were the only ones, except for Hezbollah, and Hezbollah was in a very difficult political position.
Mm.
They were the only ones who did anything for the people of Gaza. And my deep respect to them. Why they did it, I think the reason is obvious why they did it. It wasn't just solidarity, because they know what it was like in Gaza. You know how they knew? Because that blockade that the Saudis imposed on Yemen between 2015 and 2018, you know how many Yemeni children were killed? 100,000. 100,000. Go look it up. 100,000 Yemeni children were starved to death by the Saudi blockade. They understand.
The Yemen civil war was heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking. It's not talked about enough.
So they understand what was done to the people of Gaza. They understand it. That was the solidarity.
I was trying to get some numbers on the support of a Palestinian support in Arab countries versus other countries. Probably, I think people doing it could just research it online. I'm really fascinated to know the numbers there. Professor, my last question for you is, I want to ask you two more questions if you don't mind. Kind of repeating a question I asked earlier is, where is Gaza in 5-10 years time from today?
There won't be Gaza's gone. Gaza is gone. It's not me. It's not me. I told you at the very beginning, when you asked me what happened on October 7th, I said I can only rely on what are considered to be credible sources. So I look at what the sources say. I look at what the World Bank says, what the UNCTAD, United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, what the International Monetary Fund. I look at what the organizations say. They say just to clear out the rubbish of Gaza, the rubble, just to clear out the rubble. No rebuilding, just clearing out the rubble would take a minimum of more than 15 years.
Wow.
A minimum of more than 15 years, because the rubble is mixed with toxic substances like asbestos. It's mixed with unexploded ordnance. And as you know, it's mixed with a lot of dead bodies. They say it will take a minimum of the year 2040. Now, reconstruction, if we go by the pace that Israel allowed for reconstruction after Operation Cast Lead and Operation Protective Edge, if we go by that pace, you know how long it will take? You want to hear? 80 years.
To clear the rubble?
80 years. No. Rubble is
15.
More than
80
15.
years to reconstruct Gaza. To what level? You're talking about to what it was before, or a much more modern country?
No, where it was. 80 years if you go by the past. Because Israel periodically launches these high-tech killing sprees, what they call mowing the lawn. And if you go by the rate of reconstruction after each of Israel's killing sprees, it'll take 80 years. After Operation Cast Lead, there were 600,000 tons of rubble. After Operation Protective Edge, there were 2.5 million tons of rubble. Now we're dealing with 60 million.
Wow.
Israel achieved its goal. Israel's goal was very simple. If we can't expel them, we were going to make Gaza unlivable, so they'll have only two choices: to stay and die or to flee. And now it achieved that goal. There's nothing left in Gaza. So they have only two choices: to stay and die or to flee.
You don't think Arab nations, just back on the question earlier, because I've looked up some of the numbers, Tunisia, 97% supporting Palestine, Palestinians, Lebanon at 95, Jordan 92, Egypt 90, Kuwait 90. You don't think that's enough? Turkey's not 93. Turkey's obviously been very vocal. Erdogan been very, very vocal in support of Palestinians.
Turkey has been the most horrible. That's a fact. The UN, the Trump peace plan, and then the UN resolution, that was negotiated by Egypt, Turkey, and Qatar. They all supported handing Gaza over to Trump. They all supported it.
What's the alternative? The war was just so destructive. I think they were in a position where they just wanted anything to stop the war.
They had no alternative. Brace yourself. They had an alternative of telling the truth. You could say, we signed on to this resolution because we wanted to stop it, the war. However, we recognize that this resolution is a death warrant for Gaza. We recognize it. You could have said that. You could have said it's a complete outrage to the United Nations, to international law, that a criminally deranged megalomaniac was declared the head of state of Gaza. You could have said that. Nobody stopped you. There was no gun put to your head. The Russians, when they abstained, and also the Chinese, when they abstained, you know what they said? We wanted to exercise our veto, but we had no choice because all the Arab states said they supported the resolution. And then you know what happened? The Palestinian Authority said, quote, we welcome the resolution. So the Russians and Chinese didn't know what to do. But the Russians said, this is, quote, a black day in the history of the Security Council. And you know what his last words were? Don't say we didn't warn you. Don't say we didn't warn you. And that's a fact. I very rarely quote a Russian delegation, I'll tell you the truth. Not a very credible source. But this time, they told the truth. Don't say we didn't warn you.
Professor, you've walked away from, not walked away, but you've kind of stopped covering the Gaza history, Gaza in general, before October 7th. You kind of came back, obviously very vocal after October 7th. What do you plan to do moving forward?
I have no idea. I just completed a new book. It's called Gaza's Gravediggers, about the corruption at the UN. And it ends with the Security Council resolution. It's called, the end is called, the UN Security Council declares war on Gaza. That's what it did. It declared war on Gaza. It rendered null and void all of international law. There's no right to self-determination for the people of Gaza anymore. People of Palestine, there's no right of self-determination. There is nowhere in the resolution that speaks to a right to self-determination and statehood of the people in Gaza.
What about the path to a two-state solution?
Well, yeah, what it says was, if the Palestinians do everything we tell them to do, if they do everything we tell them to do, and they don't really tell you what to do, it says the PA has to reform. How? What are the benchmarks? How do we know that reform? There's nothing. There's nothing. If the Palestinian Authority is reformed, if Gaza is pacified, if Hamas lays down its arms, if it says that may, M-A-Y, may put Palestine on the pathway to a solution. That's what it says. It also says Israel doesn't have to withdraw. It says any withdrawal by Israel is conditional on there being agreement between the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, the ISF, the International Stabilization Force, and others. Israel has to agree to withdraw. It's written into
from that last. You're talking about that last buffer zone because they have to withdraw up to I think 10%.
No, they do not. No, they do not. They don't have to withdraw from 1 square inch of Gaza.
Isn't there a phase 2 have to withdraw to 40%? They're at 50% now, plus or minus. They have to withdraw to 40%, and then last phase up to 10% buffer zone, 10, 15, I can't remember.
No, it's divided now. They call it a red zone, where they claim Hamas is still in control. A yellow zone that separates the red zone from the green zone. The green zone, what you call the buffer space, is 53% of Gaza. Now, before the agreement, Gaza was among the most densely populated places on God's earth. And now half of it's the green zone. And you know what the resolution says? Israel does not have to withdraw from the green zone until there is no longer any possibility of a terrorist attack on Israel.
That's vague. That's very vague.
Any possibility. Read it.
Yeah.
How can you eliminate any possibility?
I don't know.
I mean, there's a possibility right now that an atomic bomb is going to drop in my head.
Oh, what was another term they've used? De-radicalization of Gaza. These vague terms just open the way for essentially saying that it's up to Israel to decide when to do X, Y, Z. I don't like vague terms like this with agreements.
Israel announced yesterday there are still 20,000 Hamas terrorists, 20,000. How do you verify that number?
Yeah.
Now they say they're not going to do anything until Hamas lays down its arms. How do you know whether or not it lay down its arms? How do you know?
Yeah. They want Hamas to demilitarize. If you have a few hundred people with machine guns, does that mean Hamas is not demilitarized? Or if you've got a few people that want revenge for their dead family members, they want to go ahead and shoot Israeli soldiers without getting command from Hamas commanders, does that mean there's risk of a terrorist attack?
And how can you possibly prove it? How can you prove that? Israel said at the beginning there were 20,000 militants. You remember that was the figure they used in October 7th. So now it's 2 years and 2 months later. 95% of Gaza has been pulverized. God only knows how many people were killed. And they said there's still the same 20,000 militants. Yeah. And Israel does not have to withdraw from 1 square inch of Gaza, it says, until the IDF agrees to it.
I see where your pessimism is coming from, Professor.
Yeah. You know what the pessimism is called? It's called the facts. No rational person reading this can reach any other conclusion. Israel achieved its goal. It made Gaza unlivable. And the people will be left with 2 choices, to stay and die or to flee. And all those Arab countries agreed to it. They signed on to the death warrant. That's a fact.
Yeah. Professor, pleasure.
In particular, the Turkey, and Egypt. But they were all miserable. You know, the miserable way. the great defender, the Algerians. The
Why do you
Algerians.
think the Arab nations accepted the deal? Why did they pressure the US and Israel for better terms?
I have no doubt that you know what they were told? If you don't sign on, we're going to raise your tariffs by 200%. I'm sure they were told that. I know it's a hard choice. I'm not going to deny that. And I'll even grant that maybe they had no choice but to sign on. I'll even grant that. Okay? But did you have to do this? Quote, at the outset, allow me to express our appreciation to the United States for presenting the resolution we just adopted, aimed at implementing the comprehensive plan endorsed by all parties. We acknowledge the efforts undertaken by President Trump in advancing peace worldwide. You know who that was? That was Algeria.
We've seen this from every
President,
country. We've seen every country's been praising Trump as a
Trump,
strategy.
President Trump, that criminally deranged megalomaniac, we express our appreciation to President Trump for advancing peace worldwide. They had to do that? No, they didn't. No, they didn't. You're slaves and stooges. Slaves and stooges. Pitiful.
You're talking about
Pitiful.
the Arab nations.
I would take any one Houthi to the whole rest of the Arab Muslim world. Any one Houthi to the whole rest of the Arab Muslim world. Praise Trump for his.
What value have the Houthis brought to Gaza, though? Their pressure didn't help in any way. They've just brought misery and bombing. They're bringing more misery to their population.
I got news for you, Mr. Nawfal. Ask any single Gazan whether they appreciate more what the Houthis did or what Saudi, Qatar, Jordan, Egypt, the whole bunch of them combined did. I think I know the answer.
I do too, and I've spoken to Palestinians, and I agree with you. They've been very grateful to Hezbollah and the Houthis. But what I mean, practically speaking, when you look at the results, what value have they brought to Gaza?
People are not responsible for the results. The results are in 99 cases out of 10 out of your control. What value have I done? What value have I done? Am I responsible for the fact that I didn't achieve the goal I aspire to? You respect a person for what they tried to do, what they attempted to do, for the sacrifices they were willing to make for a just cause. But you can't hold a person accountable for the lack of results when 99% is out of your control. Any rational, moral person understands that. You can't blame the Houthis for what happened in Gaza. But you certainly can blame the Egyptians, the Jordanians, the Qataris, the Turks, and all the rest of them for what happened.
Professor, absolute pleasure, sir. Thank you so much for your time and for the discussion. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.